Now let's get into what it all means. Jeff Mason, Reuters White House correspondent. Joel Rubin served as Deputy Secretary of State. Glenn Kirshner, former federal prosecutor in D.C. Chris Hill, former ambassador and State Department official. And Barrett Berger, former federal prosecutor in the Southern and Eastern Districts of New York. Jeff, you wrote an article last week saying these hearings were consequential but dull. So what if they're dull? They need to be exciting to make a difference?
No, they certainly don't. And I think that the fact that this week is going to continue with some witnesses who are specifically in touch with President Trump means that this is really moving into a new phase this week. And that, one of the key sort of pieces of criticism from Republicans last week was the fact that there was some hearsay involved, that some of these people who were testifying had not had direct contact with the president. Well, that piece of criticism will not be applicable this week because of the slate of people who will be testifying.
Barrett, let's stay on that. The first two people testifying tomorrow were on that July 25th phone call. That being the case, what does that do to the Republican argument? It's all a bunch of hearsay.
That really sends it crashing down. I mean, I think Democrats have a great opportunity here for people that were on the call. The first thing I think they need to do is to confirm what was actually said on the call. And we have to remember, we've not actually heard a recording of the call. We've seen this summary of a transcript of the call. I think you have two witnesses now. We need to confirm with each of those people what was actually said, pin the details down so there's no wiggle room for people to say, well, that's not actually what was said. Now they have these witnesses with firsthand information. If they can provide details about what was said, what the implications were, that absolutely undercuts this entire Republican talking point about hearsay and how it's not reliable.
Ambassador, if people who are directly involved can defend the president's position, I'm talking Mick Mulvaney, John Bolton, Rick Perry, and the president himself, why don't they sit down?
Well, I think it's very clear that they can't defend the president's position. And I think if they come to the hearings and they're under oath, and I think people such as Ambassador Sondland has had to take this very seriously, I think they could find themselves in a lot of jeopardy here.
Glenn, let's talk about that because Gordon Sondland is set to testify on Wednesday. We know he has already amended his original testimony, and now the Wall Street Journal has seen emails between Sondland, Mick Mulvaney, and Rick Perry. If you were prosecuting the case, wouldn't you want to see those emails?
Yeah, it's always nice to have the word of a potential co-conspirator about who he was talking with and what they were discussing. But, emails, written communications, text messages, those are gold when you're trying to build a really vivid picture of who might be involved in this, attempted dirty Ukrainian deal, which was kind of arms for interference. That's what it was. And Sondland, I think, has already gotten himself in hot water by playing games the first time around in his testimony. He's amended that, Steph, as you say. I will say, as a footnote to the Sondland discussion, you have to wonder if his attorney is advising him to invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, because if not, he's going to go in there and apparently say, you know what, even my amended story was not, shall we say, complete.
Okay, but Glenn, if he does that, what position does that put the president and or Republicans in?
It puts them in. Let's assume he comes in and he gives it all up accurately. The question then becomes, who is it that tries to take the fall for this? Is it going to be the Mulvaneys? Is it going to be the Perrys? Because it looks like Sondland is going to say, I kept them in this dirty loop. So here is, I think, at the end of the day, if Sondland gets up and says things that really implicate Mulvaney and Perry, if Mulvaney and Perry don't come in and rebut that, then Sondland's story and account will stand unrebutted and unimpeached.
Barrett, you're shaking your head no. No matter how close Sondland is to the president, he also saw what happened on Friday. Roger Stone got indicted.
Right. I mean,
convicted, excuse me.
Right. I mean, we now have 6 of the former associates or friends of the president who are now convicted felons, some of them still sitting in a jail cell. So Sondland's got to be feeling a little bit of that heat as he gets ready to testify. And as far as whether he takes the Fifth, there's a question of whether he should and the question of whether he would. I think it's incredibly unlikely that he would actually sit down and invoke his Fifth Amendment, only because that implies some sort of consciousness of guilt. He would essentially have to be saying, I can say things that will incriminate me, which is a tough position for him to actually have to own.
My goodness. All right, Joel, I want to play part of an exchange between Fox's Chris Wallace and Republican Steve Scalise, one of the top House Republicans.
Why don't we look at the three witnesses who actually did testify this week? All three of them were asked by whether it was John Ratcliffe or whether it was Chris Stewart. All three of them were asked, did you see any impeachable offenses? Did you see any bribery? Any of that? Not one of those things were mentioned. Not one person said he saw a crime committed.
Sir, with
That's
all
what
due
this is
respect,
about,
with
isn't it?
all due
Removing the
respect,
president.
that very badly mischaracterizes what they said.
All right, Steve Scalise, Jim Jordan, Devin Nunes, they're all making the same argument. You personally dealt with these men during the Benghazi hearings. Compare that experience to what we are seeing now.
Well, Stephanie, it's a deeply hypocritical irony right now that those who were leading the charge against the Obama administration and the State Department during Benghazi are the same people that have undermined the American Foreign Service and attacked the American diplomats right now on the stage and are defending President Trump and his crimes. And they have no ethical boundaries. We have to really make it clear. This is all about pure partisan power. And so Steve Scalise will say anything that he has to. Jim Jordan will. And, of course, the real elephant in the room is Mike Pompeo, who led the charge of the conspiracy theory against Hillary Clinton during Benghazi and is now behind the scenes throughout all of this, managing, manipulating, and really has lost credibility both inside state and needs to account for what he's been doing to make this Ukraine scandal happen.
Ambassador, I want to share another Republican argument. Watch this.
Having this all come out into public has weakened that relationship, has exposed things that didn't need to be exposed. The funding was released. So this would have been far better off if we would have just taken care of this behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes, let's go through a timeline. Lawmakers were pushing for this aid to be released throughout the entire month of August. On September 9th, Congress hears about the whistleblower and Democrats launch an official investigation. 2 days later, the aid was released. Given that actual fact pattern, do you buy Senator Johnson's argument?
No, of course not. And the issue, of course, is that the aid was held up for almost 2 months, during which a lot of people died on the battlefield in Ukraine. And for the Republicans to say, well, it was eventually given, the aid was given, and there was no so-called quid pro quo for it is nonsense. I mean, I think what's going to be interesting this week is we're going to hear Hale talk about why he reported back that he could not get a statement of support in favor of Yovanovitch. Presumably, Hale had direct contact with Mike Pompeo, and in the absence of Pompeo testifying, we'll finally hear at least secondhand what Pompeo is saying. Secondly, it will be interesting to hear Volker talk about what he and Sondland were trying to do in terms of preparing a statement by the Ukrainian government. So we're a long way from getting to the truth here, and I think it's going to be pretty clear that the Republican argument will be in shatters.
Jeff, take us to the White House, continuing to block Mike Pompeo, Mick Mulvaney, Rick Perry, John Bolton. The president now says maybe he'll sit down. Do you think any of these people will be sitting down to testify?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think the president's tweet certainly is going to raise some questions about what and whether there's a change in strategy over there. Based on my knowledge of how the president does these things, though, it may just be a conversation point right now rather than a serious consideration. But we'll have to see. According to my sources, the primary strategy that the White House and the Republicans that are speaking to the White House are planning to use is A, to say the president did nothing wrong, B, to say the process is unfair, and 3, to say that Republicans in the White House are continuing to get work done while the Democrats are focused on this impeachment trial. Let's see if that changes going forward.
When they make that argument, I would love to know specifically what work are Republicans saying they're getting done? Because we have to remember, at this point, Jeff, there's 300 bills sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. Whether we're talking the White House or Mitch McConnell, nothing is getting done on gun control. And we're coming off another school shooting.
Indeed. All very good points. I think the White House would respond particularly with USMCA, the trade deal between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and the president cited that in his tweet. That's something that they really want to get done. But Speaker Pelosi has also said that she was close to something on that, so she may essentially call the White House's bluff if they move forward on that agreement.
Glenn, any witnesses you see testifying this week that could help the Republicans' case?
help the Republicans' case?
Yes.
Not especially, particularly with the performance of their chosen counsel on what is cross-examination of the witnesses that have been called by the Democrats. You know, whereas Daniel Goldman did a really good, professional, competent job questioning witnesses, the Republicans can't seem to get any traction, and they don't quite know how to go after these witnesses, particularly because apparently the president won't let them say, you know what? The president may have done something wrong here, but it wasn't an impeachable offense, which I think is probably the best tack they have. It just doesn't seem to be one that they're willing to take.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.